Good morning. I'm Annie Mazes. I am joined today by Golda Rademacher and Chris Vicari, and we are breaking news. And we greatly appreciate you being here and joining us to talk about books. Over the next hour, you will hear about a heap of wonderful titles coming out over the forthcoming months. We will kick things off with an editor's picks panel. You will hear from Matt Weiland from Norton, Betsy Glick from Algonquin, and Stefan Jamanowitz from Sterling. Immediately following that, you will hear from Golda, myself, and Chris as we educate and entertain with a book buzz. So settle in, enjoy breaking news, and thank you so much for being here.
Hello, thank you for that. I hope you can all hear me. This is just, this is fitting since so much of librarians' work goes on behind the scenes and people don't know how much wonderful work you all do. It's fitting that I can't even see who I'm speaking to, but I'm thrilled to be here. I've been doing this work for 30 years and I wouldn't be doing it if not for the librarians and the libraries in Ann Arbor and the Hennepin County Library in Minneapolis and Minneapolis Public Library and so on. So thank you heartily. I want to speak about 4 books today briefly. The first one is called 4 Lost Cities. This is next in my lifelong effort to produce books that have extremely clear titles and tell you exactly what they're about. This is a book about 4 lost cities, 4 spectacular examples of how cities have risen and then fallen and even disappeared, and why that should be the case in human history. It's by an extremely dynamic author who I hope some of you will be familiar with, Annalee Newitz, who uses the pronoun they. They write sci-fi novels that Tor publishes. They write op-eds for the New York Times op-ed page, and they write extremely interesting science writing that has flair, but it also gets us out into the world and into the world of what scientists do. Annalee writes with what the writer N.K. Jemisin calls poetic ferocity, which I really love. This is a quest narrative to explore these particular 4 cities. It's fun with archaeologists, is how I like to think of it. The 4 cities include some that people don't know anything about, or at least I certainly didn't. Çatalhöyük, a Stone Age city in Turkey from thousands of years ago, to cities that we're familiar with, like Pompeii, or Angkor, famous for Angkor Wat in modern Cambodia, and then Cahokia, which some of us Midwesterners may know about as the indigenous metropolis that's on the site of East St. Louis. 1,000 years ago, there were more people there than there were in Paris, but now most people don't even know it exists. Annalee Newitz explores how those cities developed, why they rose, and what all ultimately brought them down. And the answer is, in almost every case, environmental issues. So this is a book for fans of Charles Mann's books like 1491, and it's a book that kind of trolls our present by looking at our past and how things that we think of as very sure can disappear and be lost. That's 4 Lost Cities. The second book is called Beloved Beasts, by a writer named Michelle Nijhuis. It rhymes with my house. This is a book about something that I think a lot of us care deeply about extinction, about animal extinction, but seen from a totally fresh angle. It's about the campaign to fight against extinction, anti-extinction efforts. It's a history of conservation. This is the book you give to all those readers who love Elizabeth Kolbert's The Sixth Extinction. In fact, Elizabeth Kolbert is a big fan of Michelle Nijhuis, and there's a blurb from her on the book jacket. It's a book, a kind of book I love, a book that has great shape, a writer who really knows what she's doing, inspired by Aesop's fables. Each chapter is about one particular animal and the figures who fought to save that particular animal, sometimes scientists, sometimes activists, sometimes philosophers and others. Some of the figures are well known, like Aldo Leopold or Rachel Carson, and they really come alive in this book for me in ways that they hadn't before. Others are completely unknown. I love the story about hawks and a woman named Rosalie Edge who fought against the use of feathers in women's hats a century ago, an early feminist figure and a neglected one. The animals are the bison, the bald eagle, black rhino, and so on. What I love about it is it goes beyond the individual animals and becomes an argument about the rise of and the need for biodiversity. It's also really striking in taking issue with some of the early racism in the conservation movement. And she deals with that really, really squarely and really provocatively, and I think usefully. And finally, one thing I love about it is that it's a hopeful book. And God knows we need some hopeful books. It's a book about successes that we've had in the past and what we can have in the future in protecting all animals, and indeed including ourselves. The third book I wanted to mention is called Philip Roth, the biography by Blake Bailey. It is the long-awaited biography of Philip Roth by Blake Bailey. Is I think it's fair to say the foremost literary biographer of our time. It took him nearly 10 years. He had, as you may know, complete involvement of Philip Roth, but also complete independence, which I think is really important, because one thing that distinguishes the book as a great work of biography is that it captures the incredible achievement of Roth across 50 years, but it also doesn't shy away, from the reasons he became both so celebrated and so vilified. And I think that's one of the things that marks it as an extraordinary biography, that it doesn't flinch from his failings, even as it captures the whole sweep from Roth winning the National Book Award, the youngest winner ever when he was 26, still in the 1950s, all the way through, the years of the sexual revolution and Portnoy's complaint, and to Obama giving him the biggest, the National Medal of Arts, and his wonderful line when Roth described that what Mr. Trump speaks as a language he called jerkish, which I quite like. The other things I love about this book, I think it'll appeal to many different kinds of readers. It captures the world of that Roth came out of. Jewish, lower middle class Newark. The literary gossip people are going to love, as I do, all the stuff about books and magazines and other writers in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and so on. The role of Roth in politics, in American politics, is extraordinary and important, and that comes shining through. And then finally, this book is just drenched in sex, and I think there will be plenty of readers who are interested in that part of it. So this is biography at its best, incredibly rich subject, and a book that itself swings. Mary Carr calls it a monumental gift in the realm of international letters, and I think she's right. And finally, I hope I'm okay on time, I hope. The Sound of the Sea, I'll be very brief. Seashells, I love seashells, and I don't think I'm alone in that. This is a glorious book about something that appeals to all of us and captures the beauty and glory of seashells by a writer whose previous book was a finalist for the National Book Award. She wrote a book about rain. This book is, I published a few years ago, The Death and Life of the Great Lakes, which is a wonderful big bestseller. We also publish the book The Gulf that won the Pulitzer Prize. This is the next in our efforts at Norton to corner the market in books about water. I think one of the glories of it is not just that she captures the beauty and the glory of seashells themselves, she also unusually writes about the animals inside them, the mollusks, which most people ignore. And of course, mollusks, one of the most common animals on the planet. They're found, the snails on the top of the Himalayas, to the clams at the bottom of the sea. She writes about the importance of mollusks and why they matter. It's a book full of stories about shells, how they've mattered in how they've been money and jewelry, and even as kind of oracles of our future. She writes about what seashells have to tell us about in the past, about evolution and continental drift and the presence of lost cities, as well as what they tell us about the future and the dangers of pollution, plastics, and climate change. So this is a book, I think it's Shells Could Be the Next Trees, you know, all those readers of tree books. And for anybody who loves the great old Anne Morrow Lindbergh book, Gift from the Sea, this is for them as well. Thank you so much. I want to throw it over to one of my favorite publishers and people in publishing, Betsy from Algonquin.
Hi, everyone. I love talking to librarians. Annie knows that, and working with all of you, what you do is so important. At Algonquin, and Matt, you're so amazing, and you know I'm obsessed. Like, fact. But first book that I will out is our Bellwether winner. As you might know, for the last 10 years, Algonquin has been the proud publisher of the Pan Bellwether Prize for Socially Conscious Fiction. This is a prize that was created by Barbara Kingsolver, and the previous Bellwether winners have all become staples of a backlist staple and a course adoption staple, like Lisa Coe's The Leavers and Hillary Jordan's Mudbound. So I'm delighted to be publishing our latest winner in January, Katherine Seligman's At the Edge of the Haight, a novel about a young homeless teen in San Francisco and the family she finds in the streets. Recently, I'm sure you all know, there's been a push to demolish tent cities, and there's been increasing policing of the homeless in California and throughout the nation, even though affordable housing is out of reach for most people, or for many people. So At the Edge of the Haight feels incredibly timely, but it is also, like Algonquin fiction, simply a wonderful, moving, original story with a vivid sense of place. At just 20 years old, Maddie Donaldo has made a family of sorts in the dangerous spaces of San Francisco. She knows who to trust, where to eat, and how to take care of her dog. It's best and about that. At any rate, I was talking about Katherine Seligman, who is a journalist and who has written this novel based on her experiences following young homeless teenagers on the streets of San Francisco. And while we're positioning this as an adult novel, I think At the Edge of the Haight, like our other Bellwether novels, has important crossover appeal. My next book is also extremely topical. Made in China is the story of, it opens up the world of Chinese labor camps and the people in them beyond what we read in the daily papers. It tells the true story of a man named Sun Yi, who was imprisoned by authorities for practicing Falun Gong, which is a meditation practice banned by the Chinese government. The clampdown on religion turned Sun Yi, a gentle, quiet, married engineer, into a dissident who spent much of the rest of his life in and out of Laogai, slave labor camps, being tortured, starved, and working his fingers to nubs, making things like cheap Halloween decorations for American big box stores. So Made in China begins with the riveting October day in 2012 when a woman in Oregon named Julie Keith opened a box containing a foam headstone, and an SOS that Sun Yi had written fell from the box. And so his story came to light. Made in China weaves Sun Yi's story, which is difficult to take, but very, very important, with an explanation of the history of forced labor in China, a history of the US trade policy with China, as well as the current worsening situation among the ethnic Uyghur minority. But Pang also offers ways for US consumers and corporations to try to make informed buying choices. So this is a book that vividly, readably brings home the costs, economic, environmental, human, of our addiction to fast fashion and cheap goods. If you aren't already taking a long, hard look at your consumption habits these days, after reading this book, I promise you that you will. Even when we just got the proposal a few years ago, I swore I'd never buy another $9 fleece from Old Navy again, and I have not. Pang is a young journalist whose work has been published in Mother Jones and elsewhere. Born into a Mandarin-speaking household, she conducted hours of interviews with Sun Yi before his death. And she also went undercover to China to do more reporting for this book And if you have an opportunity to meet her someday, you should ask her how she managed that, because she truly risked her life to follow trucks from factories to prison camps, tracing the source of some of our consumer products. And as you might imagine, we already have a ton of media interest in this title and a starred boxed prepub from Publishers Weekly. Our next book, following a theme of socially conscious work, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, is a novel about a young woman in a housing estate in an unnamed British city. She watches her neighbors through their windows night and day. She observes their secret habits, their hidden lovers. She overhears their quarrels, gives them all nicknames. But when she sees them in person at the park or the laundromat, she does not speak. She cannot speak. She is mute, shocked into silence by her experiences as a refugee forced to flee the Syrian civil war alone across Europe. But our protagonist, Rania, has a lot to say about immigration, xenophobia, about whether Muslims are terrorists, and she does so anonymously in a magazine column under the name The Voiceless. So this is the mesmerizing, almost otherworldly setup for Layla AlAmmar's extraordinary and profound novel. It will be the US debut for Layla, who is a Kuwaiti American living in the UK, where she's getting her PhD on the intersection of Arab women's literature and trauma theory. Her first novel, The Pact We Made, was published in the UK to really strong reviews. And I sometimes like to describe Silence as a sense as Rear Window meets Exit West. It's certainly for readers of serious literary fiction like Mohsin Hamid's Exit West. But it is also really extremely readable and character-driven. And it becomes a truly satisfying story of one woman's healing. Rania does not remain isolated. She refuses to sit on the sidelines and just watch. And again, to say that this message resonates with me right now would be an understatement, since community and connection and hope is sort of almost all we have right now. Our next novel is something I'm especially excited about. I'm sure many of you are already really familiar with Kaitlyn Greenidge's work. Her Whiting Award-winning first novel, We Love You, Charlie Freeman, or her brilliant journalism that appears everywhere from the New York Times to Harper's Bazaar to her own Substack newsletter, which I highly recommend, or even just her incredibly incisive tweeting to her 25,000 Twitter followers. So we really expect big things for Kaitlyn's second novel, Libertie, which will publish in March. Libertie is based on a fascinating historical figure, the first Black female doctor in New York State, Susan Smith McKinney Stewart, who ran a successful practice in Weeksville, a free Black community in Brooklyn during Reconstruction. Dr. Stewart's daughter married the son of the Episcopalian Bishop of Haight and moved there, but ultimately, after the marriage fell apart, she returned to the US. In Kaitlyn's retelling, Dr. Stewart and her daughter are fictionalized as Dr. Sampson and Libertie, as Libertie grows up and tries to understand a way forward during Reconstruction. Freedom is apparently all around her, and yet she is constantly hemmed in and told how she must behave as a Black woman, especially a Black woman whose skin is too dark. This, I'm sure you're all aware, is a conversation that Black women are having every day still. So when a man from Haiti promises Libertie a more fully realized freedom in his country, she agrees to resettle there. Yet for all its beauty and spirituality, the island turns out to be even more confining. What does liberty actually mean? Kaitlyn's artful trick with this novel is to take this appealing story of a young girl trying to understand how to hold onto her identity and be a good wife in a way that just makes it moving, gorgeous, and smart, in the vein of a book like Americana and Homegoing. And the advance endorsements are already stunning, from the likes of Jackie Woodson, Mira Jacob, Kessie Lehman, and Brandon Taylor, who calls Libertie a glorious, piercing song for the ages, fierce, brilliant, and utterly free. So on that lovely note, I apologize again for the glitch, and I pass my volume button on to Stefan.
Hello, everybody. Now for something completely different, true crime. I'm here today to discuss Sterling Publishing's recent launch of 2 true crime book lines. Speaking to this audience, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir when I note that true crime is a growing publishing category whose increasing popularity has been fueled in no small part by the rise of true crime podcasts such as, among others, My Favorite Murder, David Fincher's successful adaptation for Netflix of Mindhunter as a multi-season inquiry into the mindset of notorious serial killers of the late 20th century, and the high box office returns for theatrically released films such as Black Mass, Monster, and other dramatization of the lives and exploits of real-life criminals. As a fan of true crime myself, I'm sure I speak for most of my fellow enthusiasts when I say we have an unquenchable interest when reading profiles of serial killers, mass murderers, and their crimes in what makes them tick, and at least to our way of thinking, what makes them sick. Slide, please. Oh, there we are, and that is not my, no, sorry. Okay. Sorry here. Just bear with me for a second. So, Conversations with a Killer. Conversations with the Killer is a book series whose content is drawn from hours of interviews, sometimes hundreds of hours, conducted over several years with notorious serial killers and mass murderers. The subjects of the books, the murderers, are notable for their articulateness and their methodical descriptions of the way in which they lived their lives before, during, and after the atrocities they committed. These are not ordinary people, far from it, yet they discuss their motivations, their methods, and their murders with a candor and a matter-of-factness that is, quite frankly, often chilling. Publishing in June 2021 is Conversations with a Killer, Ed Kemper. If there's such a thing as an ordinary profile for a serial killer, Ed Kemper doesn't fit it. He stands a formidable 6'9" and has an equally formidable IQ of 145. Before he embarked on his spree of murder, cannibalism, and necrophilia, he hoped to join his local police force in Santa Cruz, California. In this book, Kemper talks with author Derry Matera about his criminal history, which began with his murders of his grandparents when he was 15 years old. That earned him detention in a juvenile facility for the criminally insane until he was 21. After his release, between 1972 and 1973, he killed another 8 people, all women, many of them hitchhiking college students. His spree earned him the nickname the Co-Ed Killer. Kemper talks about his fraught family relationships, especially with his mother. She was one of his last victims, dispatched with particularly grisly furor, and the circumstances that motivated him to turn himself into the police. Kemper is said to have served as a case study for authors of characters who appeared in such best-selling books and their film adaptations as The Silence of the Lambs and American Psycho. Still alive in a California facility, Kemper still fascinates millions of true crime readers, many of whom have become familiar with him through his portrayals in Netflix's Mindhunter. His is not a household name like that of Charles Manson and Ted Bundy, but he is still one for the books for your true crime readers. Next slide, please. And speak of the devils, Manson and Bundy. Conversations with a Killer, Ted Bundy, which served as the foundation for another popular Netflix documentary, is a series of death row interviews done shortly before Bundy's execution in 1989. Bundy's killing spree left at least 30 young women dead across 7 states between 1974 and 1978. He speaks somewhat eerily in the third person in these interviews, providing the appalling details of his crimes and disclosing how he attracted and dispatched his victims. He also offers his thoughts on other infamous serial killers, including John Wayne Gacy and Son of Sam. Conversations with a Killer, Charles Manson, is the gripping story of the real Charles Manson as told by his longtime prison administrator, counselor, unofficial press agent, and confidant, Ed George. Perhaps the most infamous criminal of the 20th century, Manson was convicted for orchestrating the shocking Tate LaBianca murders in 1969 and for 2 other killings, all conducted by his cult of followers known as the Family. George and his co-author, Derry Matera, detail the troubling events of Manson's youth, the historic 1969 murders, and the subsequent trial that ended an era. They also delve into Manson's life behind bars, which ended with his death in 2017. Next slide, please. Our other new true crime series is Profiles in Crime, a quintet to date of chapter books that shine a light on the most notorious killers of the mostly 20th century. In their accounts of how these killers were discovered, apprehended, and brought to justice for their crimes, they further shine light on the evolution of criminal forensics and its development into the sophisticated modern methodology it is today. Serial Killers of the 80s, due out in spring of 2021, is written by Jane Fritsch, a Pulitzer Prize nominated journalist who covered the trial of John Wayne Gacy for the Chicago Tribune when his case broke in the mid-70s. Like her other book in the series, Serial Killers of the 70s, this book takes us back to the late 20th century when frequent news reports of serial murders and their perpetrators became a regular part of our cultural zeitgeist. This book features 13 medium-length profiles of infamous serial killers such as Jeffrey Dahmer, renowned as the Cannibal Killer, and Aileen Wuornos, who was portrayed by Charlize Theron in an Academy Award-winning role in the film Monster, and whose 7 confirmed murders between 1989 and 1990 helped to establish the presence of women in the annals of serial killer crimes. The book also profiles killers whose exploits are still in the news today. Among them, Joseph James DeAngelo, dubbed the Golden State Killer, who was sentenced just this past August for 13 murders, 50 rapes, and hundreds of burglaries committed between 1973 and 1986. And Samuel Little, America's most prolific serial killer, one of whose estimated 100 victims' remains were discovered just this past summer. Next slide, please. The 4 previous books in the Profiles in Crime series include How to Catch a Killer, written by celebrated forensic psychologist Katherine Ramsland. Spanning more than a century, this book's 30 chapters show how criminal mistakes, dogged investigative persistence, and modern forensic technologies, such as DNA-based genetic genealogy, have run some of history's most notorious criminals to ground. Serial Killers of the 70s, written by Jane Fritsch, profiles the most notorious serial murderers of the decade that became known as the golden age of serial killers. Among them, Ted Bundy, David son of Sam Berkowitz, the Sunday morning slasher Coral Eugene Watts, John Wayne Gacy, and Rodney Alcala, who is believed to have killed between 50 and 130 people between 1971 and 1979. The Profiles in Killer Cults by veteran true crime writer Stephen Singular delve into the charisma and manipulativeness that make cult leaders so compelling that they can persuade their adherents to harm or even kill others. The book tells the stories behind both famous and unfamiliar cults, including Jim Jones's People's Temple, Charles Manson's family, David Koresh's Branch Davidians, Keith Raniere's, and I'm sure I'm going to be butchering this, Nixivim, NXIVM, the subject of HBO's recent series, The Vow, which televised coincidentally during the sentencing period for Raniere and his Confederates, and Marshall Applewhite, leader of the Heaven's Gate cult, who, along with 38 followers, killed themselves in 1997 in the belief that the Hale-Bopp comet signaled the arrival of a spaceship that would transport them to a higher plane of existence. And finally, Extreme Killers by prolific true crime author Michael Newton. Historical in scope and international in breadth, this collection of true crime stories chronicles 15 of the most infamous extreme killers who ever lived, those with the largest number of confirmed kills, in many cases more than 50, and in some cases several hundred. And on that note, thank you all. Over to you, Golda.
Wow, thank you so much to all of our editors for participating today. It's really great to hear directly from the people who work with the authors and who make the books happen. So now we're switching over to a book buzz where Annie, Chris, and I will each have 10 minutes to blast you with information about more forthcoming titles, and I get to go first. When Brains Dream addresses the core questions about dreams while illuminating the most up-to-date science in the field. Written by two world-renowned sleep and dream researchers, it debunks common myths while acknowledging the mysteries that persist around both the science and experience of dreaming. They help readers understand key features of several types of dreams, from prophetic dreams to nightmares and lucid dreams. When Brains Dream reveals recent discoveries about the sleeping brain and the many ways in which dreams are psychologically and neurologically meaningful experiences, it explores a host of dream-related disorders and explains how dreams can facilitate creativity and be a source of personal insight. Scott Wiedensahl is the author of nearly 30 books, including the Pulitzer Prize finalist Living on the Wind. Our understanding of the navigational and physiological feats that enable birds to cross immense oceans, fly above the highest mountains, or remain in unbroken flight for months at a stretch has expanded because of improvements in technology. In World on the Wing, Wiedensahl explores all the amazing new information about bird migration and introduces readers to the scientists, researchers, and bird lovers trying to preserve global migratory patterns in the face of climate change and other environmental challenges. Coming from Tin House in January, The House on Vesper Sands by Porrick O'Donnell is a Victorian mystery full of atmosphere of the dark streets of London. There's a lot of banter between Inspector Cutter and Gideon Bliss, who sort of stumbles into helping out the inspector while they are both trying to figure out what is happening to young women going missing in London. And then we also have an intrepid female reporter on the case. The publisher at Tin House calls this a mix between Sherlock Holmes and Jane Austen. Helen MacDonald loved it. Publishers Weekly gave it a starred review, and Library Reads votes are due by December 1st. Stephen Pressfield is best known for his novels Gates of Fire and Tides of War. His new book, A Man at Arms, is a return to the ancient world he knows so well. Several of his previous historical novels included a recurring character named Telamon, and now Telamon takes center stage. He's been hired by the Romans to intercept an incendiary letter from a religious fanatic who calls himself Paul the Apostle to insurrectionists in Corinth. But Telamon has his own motivations, and his journey becomes a gripping saga of conquest and rebellion, bloodshed and faith. This is full of action and perfect for your fans of ancient or military historical fiction. The Five Wounds by Kirsten Valdez-Quaid is a novel that spans a year in the life of a family in a small town in northern New Mexico. Amadeo gets home from a planning meeting for the Holy Week procession and finds his estranged, pregnant teenage daughter on the porch. Amadeo still lives with his mother, so he tries to get his daughter, Angel, to go stay somewhere else. But she is a force to be reckoned with, and she will not be put off. The Five Wounds spans the baby's first year as 5 generations of the Padilla family converge. These characters will stay with you long after the final page. And Colm Toybeen said, Kirsten Valdez-Quaid, by concentrating on the truth of small moments, has brought a whole world into focus. Now I'm going to take you into the beginning of our Summer 21 list. We just posted the new catalogs on Edelweiss, I think last week maybe. So We Need New Stories by Nasreen Malik is something that we all need right now. Malik examines the political myths that are used to deflect and discredit demands for social justice, like identity politics, the idea that there is a free speech crisis, the slippery slope argument, and whataboutery. She picks apart how these myths spread and how they are adopted across our media and popular culture. She identifies the tools and the rhetorical sleights of hand that sustain these myths and are used time and again to halt demands for change. So a version of this book was published in the UK last year to much praise, and now Malik has revised it for the US audience. Living Nations, Living Words is an anthology of First Peoples poetry edited by Joy Harjo. This is part of her Poet Laureate project and will have an interactive online component. One of the ideas of the anthology is to show the breadth of Native poets writing today and celebrate their vital and unequivocal contributions to American poetry. This will be a good companion to the anthology that came out this past August. And if you tune into the President's Program at ALA Midwinter on Sunday, January 24th, you'll get to hear a conversation between Joy Harjo and her editor at Norton, Jill Bialowski. On Juneteenth interweaves American history, dramatic family chronicle, and searing episodes of memoir. Annette Gorin Reed, the descendant of enslaved people brought to Texas in the 1850s, recounts the origins of Juneteenth and explores the legacies of the holiday that remain with us today. America on Fire by Elizabeth Hinton documents the most important lessons from flashpoints in the 1960s to now. She shows that police violence precipitates community violence and shows how this continues to escape policymakers who respond by further criminalizing entire groups instead of addressing underlying socioeconomic causes. Ultimately, Hinton argues that we cannot understand the civil rights movement without coming to terms with the astonishing violence and hugely expanded policing regime that followed it. Taking us from Watts in 1965 to the murder of George Floyd in 2020, Hinton's highly anticipated America on Fire offers a framework for understanding our current crisis. So instead of a plot summary, I'm going to tell you some backstory about Hold Fast by J.H. Galernter. Star Lawrence is the editor who published Patrick O'Brian's Aubrey Maturin series in the USA. And ever since that series became a huge hit, he has received proposals for the next great naval fiction series or the follow-up to Patrick O'Brian. Well, he has said no to all of them until now. Hold Fast is nautical fiction, espionage thriller, and full of nonstop action. You can be confident in recommending this to your fans of Aubrey Maturin or Horatio Hornblower, or even fans of espionage authors like Ian Fleming. And you don't need to know tons of nautical terms or naval history to be swept up by the story. We have the second book in this series signed up already. And just a note, since we're talking about Patrick O'Brian, Norton is reissuing the full series in paperback with lovely new covers over the next few years because people continue to discover these books. Unsettled Ground is the new novel by Claire Fuller, author of Our Endless Numbered Days, Swimming Lessons, and Bitter Orange. In this harrowing novel, Fuller builds a tale of sacrifice and hope, of homelessness and hardship, of love and survival, in which two marginalized and remarkable people dig to uncover long-held family secrets, and in their own way, repair, recover, and begin again. Fuller is based in England, but with the magic of online events, I'm hoping to have her on an author panel for librarians in January to introduce you to the new book, and we will have the cover image revealed soon. The Norton sales reps, as you can probably imagine, are huge readers, and they are always way ahead of me on our seasonal reading. So at our sales conference a couple of weeks ago, all of them said they loved Mrs. March. So I had to read it, of course. I read it in one day this past Sunday, wondering if Mrs. March was losing her mind. Was she being drugged? Was her husband gaslighting her? What is going on? But I'm not going to tell you. I will say that the actress and producer, Elizabeth Moss, has already optioned this book for her production company, and she said that she was so captured by it that she knew she had to play Mrs. March. So I will have an ARC giveaway in the library newsletter once the ARCs are in, and I'll post the digital ARCs as soon as they're ready. All of your Olive and Mabel fans need this book by Andrew Cotter coming out in December. Just a plug for our kids' books, which you can learn more about in the Book Buzz videos on my YouTube channel. And speaking of YouTube, I am going to make a longer book buzz video for the new season that I'll be ready to share in time for ALA Midwinter. You can also find video wrap-ups of our fall and winter titles there, and I hope to expand it with some author videos and other things next year. You can find our digital arcs on Edelweiss and NetGalley, and then I do print giveaways in the newsletter as often as I can. And I wanted to say thank you so much for listening and for tuning in this morning. And now I'm going to turn it over to Annie Mazes from Workman.
Thank you, Golda. It is always such a pleasure to see your face. Thank you, librarians, for being here today. I am Annie Mazes from Workman Publishing. This is my email address if you'd like to get in touch. I do have a few arcs of most of the books that you'll hear about, so let me know if you'd like something. And these are our social channels. And the first book I'm going to talk about today is Big Girl, Small Town, which I am thrilled has been getting such wonderful review attention. Magella O'Neill is the heroine of this book, and she is not like anyone else I've read about. It's a captivating Irish debut novel. It's been called The Milkman Meets Dairy Girls. Magella is happiest out of the spotlight, away from her neighbor's stares and all of the gossip that permeates her small town in Northern Ireland, where she grew up during the Troubles. Underneath Magella's seemingly ordinary life, she works in a chip shop. She comes home, is the fact that she doesn't know where her father is, and everyone in her town has been affected by this lingering divide between Protestants and Catholics. When Magella's very predictable existence is completely upended by the death of her granny, not a spoiler alert, she comes to realize that there is a whole big world outside of her community. This is told in an incredibly original voice, and it will appeal to fans of Sally Rooney and Atesha Mashveg, and it's gotten a book list and a Library Journal Starred review. Next up is In Case You Get Hit by a Bus, which does require me to talk to you about mortality for just a minute, but I promise it is worth it. Librarians on Early Work Galley Chat have been talking about this book. I have been working my way through it, and I have found it incredibly helpful. It's from the people who have started the online digital platform Everplans, but you don't need to have anything to do with that. But it provides simple, easy to follow steps to organizing everything in your life, from Netflix passwords to funeral plans, to make sure that if for some reason you are no longer here, the people who are left behind don't have any questions about the logistics surrounding your loss. Like I said, I'm a big evangelist for this book. It's very reassuring to know that, my kiddo will be taken care of. So thank you for letting me talk about mortality for a hot second. Next up, we've got Fans by Larry Olmsted, who is the author of Real Food, Fake Food. He did so much research and found all of these studies on sports fandom. Chris, I'm already sending you a copy, don't you worry. And he makes the case that the more you identify with sports teams, the better your social, psychological, and physical health. The more meaningful your relationships are, the more connected and happier you feel. Fans maintain better cognitive processing as they age. They have better language skills. And on a societal level, sports really help heal after tragedies, providing hope when we need it most. As this global pandemic sidelines teams and fans are sorely aware of what they are missing, this book, Fans, reminds us why we love games so much and what community really means. Next up is Ms. Adventure. Jess Phoenix likes to sort of downplay the fact that she's an incredible boss woman, but I'm not going to do that because she's an incredible boss woman. As a volcanologist, natural hazards expert, and the founder of Blueprint Earth, Jess Phoenix has dedicated her life to scientific exploration. Her career path, which has been hard-earned in the still male-dominated world of science, has inspired her to devote her life to making science much more inclusive and accessible. Ms. Adventure's skillfully blends personal memoir, daring adventure, scientific explanation, and some serious girl power, following Phoenix's journey from jungles to glaciers, university classrooms to television studios, and even to the side of the world's largest volcano, where she got real MacGyvery and fixed a tire with ballpoint pen, bubblegum, and duct tape. See my earlier comment about how she's a boss. Readers will thoroughly enjoy her unbelievable adventures and all embarked on for the love of science. This book is absolutely YA crossover. Next up, let's go Yankees, Laverne. We're going to have a talk. Chris and I are going to turn you to a Mets fan. Why We Cook explores the place where food meets feminism. In it, artist Lindsay Gardner brings together stories, essays, kitchen profiles, interviews, all featuring 112 women restaurateurs, food producers, activists, writers, professional chefs, and home cooks, all of whom are not only dedicated to their craft, but to changing the world of food. There are profiles on change makers like Cristina Martinez, a chef who immigrated from Mexico and who brings her Philadelphia community together through food while using her platform to champion immigration rights. There's Leah Penniman, who describes a day in her life on Soulfire Farm, which she co-founded to combat racism in the food system. There are narrative recipes, and it's filled with beautiful watercolor illustrations and portraits. Gardner captures a sense of what is unique about each of these women and bringing them to life. Together, their voices reveal the power of food to uplift and nourish, reveal complex questions and affect change, and offer us all an opportunity to learn about each other and ourselves. Next up, we have a memoir by Richard Thompson, who I will admit, I did not know who that man was. I've subsequently listened to a lot of his music and it's tremendous. And every time I talk about this book, people come out of the woodwork because he has this massive cult following. So Richard Thompson, known for his brilliant songwriting, his extraordinary guitar playing, and he has been considered one of the top 20 guitarists of all time by Rolling Stone. This is his first memoir, and it chronicles the start of his legendary career from the pivotal years of 1967 to 75. It talks about how he matured into a major musician, established the genre of British folk rock with his band Fairport Convention, which he then quickly left to join a duo act with his wife at the height of the band's popularity. His discovery and ultimate embrace of Sufism profoundly reshaped his approach to his music. And in this intimate memoir, he recreates the spirits of the 60s as he found, lost, and then found his way again. It takes us inside life on the road in the UK and the US, crossing paths and playing with the likes of Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, Jimi Hendrix, and so many more. Next up, we have Hot Stew by Fiona Mosley, whose first book, debut novel, was Elmet, which was shortlisted for the Booker Prize. This novel tells the story of a very unlikely group of individuals in contemporary London, from the top echelons of society right down to the bottom. All are in some way connected to this Soho building, which is owned by this very mysterious billionaire, Agatha. The problem is she wants to convert this building into like fancy shops and very expensive apartments. But the problem with this is that in the building, there's a brothel, and Precious and Tabitha, two of the women who live and work in the brothel, are not going quietly. The fight over this piece of property draws in the men who visit Precious and Tabitha, including Robert, a one-time member of a far-right group. There's Jackie, a policewoman intent on making London much safer for all women, and a very colorful array of vagabonds and strays who occupy the basement. This book is very funny, it's smart, there's an incredible cast of characters, and it really talks about the biggest issues faced today, questions about property and ownership, inheritance, wealth, gender, and power. And finally, my last book is Folklore by Angela Herr. Elsa Park is a physicist at the top of her game. She's stationed at an international observatory in Antarctica, thousands of miles from the ghosts that have haunted her life and her family, literally ghosts. But even the South Pole cannot prevent her childhood imaginary friend from finding her. The reappearance of this ghostly apparition signals that the curse her mom told her afflicted the women of their line, who were doomed to repeat the narrative lives of their ancestors from Korean folklore, and whose stories Elsa has been trying desperately to outrun, is finally catching up with her. When tragedy strikes, Elsa must return to her childhood home and the cultural lore that she rejected in favor of hard science. Once there, she grapples with a splintered family as she seeks long, elusive answers in the handwritten pages of her mother's dark fairy tales. Definitely a very real heavy dose of magical realism in this beautiful novel. And that is it for me. Thank you so much. On to you, Chris.
Thank you so much, Annie. Hello, librarians. My name again is Chris Ficcari, Director of Library Marketing at Sterling Publishing. Thanks for all you do every single day. Thanks to my nice colleagues, Golda and Annie, for all they do too. Now on to the books. Next slide, please. We're going to take a quick look at books publishing now. The first one is Victory, World War II in Real Time. On the 75th anniversary year of the end of World War II, yesterday was Veterans Day, of course, we teamed up with the Associated Press to commemorate it by looking at 50 key events from the 200 heroic photographers and reporters, some of whom gave their lives to cover these unforgettable struggles from the home front to the front lines around the world. Next slide, please. Obama, an updated edition of our 2017 book that looks back at the president's journey from his historic victory to significant milestones and final days in office to his life after the White House. Next slide, please. Kevin Zraly's Windows on the World Complete Wine Course Revised Edition. I talk about this book every time that we have a new revised edition like we do here, because it's still one of the best books I've ever been around, and it is still the best book for wine beginners who simply want to learn how to walk around a wine store and not be intimidated. This revised edition includes new chapters on Prosecco, Rosé, and the wines of Sicily, plus a fascinating chapter written by Kevin Zraly on his unique 50-year perspective on how wine and food culture has changed since 1970. Kevin Zraly is a James Beard Lifetime Achievement Award winner. Now coming in spring 2021 with my next slide. You heard our editor Stefan talk about these books earlier, so just to refresh your memory, Conversations with a Killer, Ed Kemper. Ed Kemper murdered 10 people, including college students and family members. He's been a case study by authors for characters in films up until today. Still alive in a California facility, he fascinates millions of true crime readers, built stronger through the Netflix Mindhunter show. But even with that, not a household name like Manson and Bundy, but still he is one for your true crime readers who want to know what makes these terrible, terrible people tick. And I say that as a true crime reader myself. Next slide, please. And as a reminder of the other two in our Conversations with the Killer series, Charles Manson and Ted Bundy. Next, continuing with true crime, serial killers of the 80s. Yes, as Stefan said, if you're a true crime reader, these are for you. Jeffrey Dahmer, Aileen Wuornos, the Golden State Killer. This fifth book in the Profiles in Crime series uncovers the facts about their crimes, along with advances in forensics that thankfully led to their capture. Next slide, please. And that book is, of course, part of our Profiles in Crime series. Here is a look at the backlist, including the just released Killer Cults. After all that true crime reading, you might need to take the edge off, which leads me to two new titles on our next slide. Homegrown Cannabis. The United States marijuana industry is worth billions of dollars and not slowing down. And cultivating cannabis at home is rewarding, economical, and allows you to decide how it's grown. Herbalist and grower Alexis Burnett will show you how to nurture plants from seed or clone to harvest, and also how to maintain the right growing conditions, fight pests, and provide key nutrients, all without chemicals. Once you've grown it, next slide, please. Cannabis for health. The cannabis plant is not one size fits all. Different strains work for different people in different ways, and Cannabis for Health discusses those various types and potencies and what healing benefits each offers, including some high-profile strains and how they address 30 key conditions. It relies on testimonials by users and physicians to guide people in their choices. Next slide, please. 1001 Tarot Spreads. One surging subject, especially in 2020, is tarot. It's been surging for us for the past couple of years, but specifically this year, a couple reasons why we think. One is its increased popularity. Could be part of a wider global trend toward mindfulness. Many see a real sense of community in using it. People think it's about predicting the future, but it's really about the present, and it can be very empowering. Second, social media has helped to destigmatize it and make it more accessible to those who are curious. Plus, Instagram is full of beautifully shot tarot spreads, and in recent months, local tarot readers have grown their platforms, sharing their readings to their followers. Some on YouTube have over 200,000 subscribers. This 544-page guide, written by Cassandra Eason, a master tarot reader and best-selling author herself, can be the one source book for different ways to draw and place cards that will serve as a tool for self-discovery and self-reflection, while giving clues about the future, context for the present, and insight into the past. Next slide, please. 2 new entries in our Mystic Library series. Wicca Crystal Magic is perfect for anyone, including those on a budget who want to learn how to use crystals for spells, elixirs, and charms. It includes an overview of 13 popular crystals in contemporary witchcraft, along with a comprehensive look at their practical applications in everyday spell work. You'll get an understanding how to collect them, clean them, clear them, and charge them. Also, which crystals are best and most versatile. And Wicca Herbal Magic. Our author centers the spells around 13 herbs most easy to find: chamomile, cinnamon, dandelion, lavender, rosemary among them. And because they're culinary, and or medicinal herbs, you'll have plenty of options for using the leftovers from your spell work for teas, baths, oils, and smudging and blessing rituals. Next slide, please. Moving on to cookbook titles, the Alternative Flour Cookbook. Alternative flours can be used as substitutes for regular wheat flour if you have an allergy or intolerance, or if you just want to add more variety to your diet. So for all the bread bakers out there, time to consider chickpea, buckwheat, or even almond. All have many advantages with their complex flavors and host of nutrients. And it's not just bread. Oh no. Alternative flours have many sides, making it easy to create plant-based pastas, donuts, cakes, and so much yummy more in 100 clear recipes. Next slide, please. This is the 3rd title in our plant-based kitchen series, which includes the Oat Milk Cookbook and the Vegan Meat Cookbook. We are making living easier and more delicious than ever. Next slide, please. The Instant Pot Kosher Cookbook by Paula Scheuer, contemporary kosher recipes for the king of all kitchen appliances, that being the Instant Pot. So many traditional Jewish dishes are soups and stews prepared before Friday night and kept warm throughout Shabbat. And families have relied on slow cookers to achieve that soft, flavor-filled recipe of their ancestors, but they lamented the time required. Lament no more. The Instant Pot allows for vastly shorter cooking times without compromising flavor or texture. Our cookbook includes a robust array of both traditional and contemporary kosher recipes tailored to this modern appliance. Next slide, please. 60 quick knit blanket squares. If you have been knitting through the pandemic, and by that I mean knitting to reduce stress and calm your mind, then 6th and Spring is the publisher for you. And the 60 Quick Knit series will keep your hands working. And if you are a regular knitter, you may have seen over the past few months that the blanket squares are taking over. And I know why. Depending on your pattern, blanket squares can be the simplest of projects. The 60 blanket squares included here range in skill level and technique, so knitters can work on the go year round. And you don't have to worry about tension. With every design worked in Cascade Yarns, 220 superwash merino wool, and 100 color campaigns to choose from, these blankets will be soft, easy care, and affordable. Even the most hesitant knitter will find plenty here to give their creativity a boost. So just sit home, stack those squares for that rainy day. And when you decide to put together a beautiful blanket, it will be as easy as 1, 2, 3. Next slide, please. Lastly, Bob Dylan, a lavishly illustrated and thoughtfully abridged edition of a classic book on Mr. Dylan, published to coincide with Dylan's 80th birthday in 2021. This is a must-read for all Dylan and music aficionados. My next and final slide has my contact information as well as my colleague Andrea Gokenauer. Please reach out to either one of us for all your sterling book needs, and I thank you for being with us today. My friends, those are the books, and that's the way it is today on the NWS Book Buzz. On behalf of Golda Rademacher of W.W. Norton, Annie Mazes of Workman, and all the speakers here today, I'm Chris Vicari of Sterling. We thank you for being here today and wish you the very best in the days ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you all.